Welcome to Insights with John Davis. I'm your host. Today we're breaking a story about a smear campaign that didn't smear. With me is the woman who, as told by the Washington Post reporter Michael Cronish when he was doing his investigation in Montreal, 25 people around Montreal were saying, if you want to know about Kamala Harris and her time in Montreal, you need to find Jamie Ward Windley. Jamie, pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
It's my pleasure.
So, Jamie, just wanted to say a couple of things to sort of set the stage for what you're going to be sharing with us today and what we're going to try to achieve today.
Okay.
Primarily, our objective was based upon the fact that some 38% of America was saying that they wanted to know more about Kamala Harris. And so at first, at a first glance, you would think that that's a perfect story for a national media outlet to sort of take and run with. But when you look just below the surface, that wasn't the story at all. And what we've been able to uncover is a deliberate attempt by certain media outlets, the Washington Post, the BBC, and to a lesser extent, the Toronto Star, where their entire focus has been on uncovering salacious details, pursuing unfounded allegations, and trying to create hurtful allegations that could not and will never be proved. And the proof of this is this fact, that after such a long investment of interviewing witnesses, flying to Montreal, spending all of the time and money around the investigation, they're not going to say anything about it. And the reason why is they were never trying to actually inform America about her background. It was a hatchet job, one that perhaps the Republican nominee will be saying, thanks for nothing. So, Jamie, let's get to it.
Okay.
Let me just ask this basic question. Why? Why are you that person? Why are you the person that 25 or more people all over Montreal were telling the Washington Post reporter they need to talk to you as opposed to anybody else to know about Kamala Harris?
You know, surprisingly, when I was contacted by the Post, and the reporter said to me, Jamie, I've talked to your classmates, friends, and they said that you had a pretty good relationship with Kamala. I don't think I'm the only person who had a great relationship with Kamala. I think that those that were near and dear to the circle that we had with friends would probably have very much the same thing to say about Kamala as I do. So it was a little surprising for me, but it was a nice compliment.
Understood. So before we get into the smear campaign itself, let's kind of set the stage around your relationships, what's happening in Montreal back then, stuff like that. So to begin this sort of segment of the show, why don't we just have you talk a little bit about how you met Kamala and what your initial impressions were, things of that nature.
Okay. I believe it was September 6, 1978. We're in homeroom, and this little person, because Kamala's not that tall, with really big hair, big fluffy hair, comes into our classroom, and it's our first day of high school, and she has a little look of like a deer with its headlights, right? But the self-confidence that she had to just come and sit down and say, hi, I'm Kamala Harris. Not Kamala, Kamala Harris. Hi, I'm Jamie Ward. And the other classmate said, hi, I'm so-and-so, and I'm so-and-so. And so we just met that way, first day of high school.
Did you two become friends quickly, or how'd that work? You did?
Very, very quickly. So during recess, we all talked about where we're from, our backgrounds, and how we got to Westmount High. And Kamala says, I'm from California. I said, well, I was born in New York and I'm here too. And then a couple of other of the friends in our circle one was from Boston, two from Virginia. And so we were like, oh, they're Americans. Oh. And so a fast friendship formed.
Got you. I read something about the Super Six. Oh,
Now, the
what?
Super
So what's the
Six,
Super Six?
okay, so the Super Six, which I was not a part of, is a dance troupe with Kamala and five other friends. And the affinity is that we all love to dance. Me, I like to dance by myself. So um it brought Kamala out of her shell because
Yeah,
she really enjoyed dance and always has. Always has. And the good thing about Kamala is that she was the most recent transient to Montreal.
yeah.
So she brought the latest and greatest R&B music with her. So, you know, we got to learn new music that we weren't privy to because the local station CKGM in Montreal did not really play R&B and or soul and certainly not disco.
So I want to sort of transition a little bit to
Mm-hmm.
sort of give the listeners and the viewers in the future a
Mm-hmm.
little context about what Montreal was like back then. So I
Okay.
read the article in the Toronto Star with
Mm-hmm.
the guest columnist who was talking about his memory of being at the same high school at the same time you were there,
Mm-hmm.
and he talked a lot about the difference of how the neighborhood was back then. Gentrification had not started. It
Mm-hmm.
was clearly a tale of two neighborhoods or two cities with
Mm-hmm.
the population of students that were attending that school.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned to me earlier that the word necessity had a particular relevance to your friendship with
Mm-hmm.
Kamala and
Mm-hmm.
with some of the other Black students who were there. I think I have a similar experience in my own background, but
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to hear about yours. So,
Okay.
would you share that? What does that mean? The necessity of your friendship?
I'm speaking from a psychology major, right? And so, what I understand to be pivotal in the developmental years of a teenager is someone to confide in. And for all intents and purposes, Kamala was a very good confidant to anyone she was friends with. Definitely a grave digger in terms of receiving information, never disseminating again to anyone else. You told it to Kamala, and that's where it stayed. So I think that Kamala was an ally to many of us.
So, during the time that you were going back and forth, um, were you and Kamala affected by the racial dynamic at the school?
Then,
And would you say that that had an impact on you, had an impact on your friends, including Kamala Harris?
yes, definitely. So in 78, it was probably less than 50 Black or biracial families in that high school. It was predominantly white. There was a very, very large population. And most of the minorities that went to the school at the time traveled to get there. Relations between the French and the English were very strenuous, to say the least. And there were some very clear obstacles that we were facing, especially as Americans in that society, in that community, particularly Westmount. Many of the students had not been friends with any Black people. This would be their first rapport, and which later developed into friendships with Black people.
How did that affect your circle of friends? What was that like? And was
A very
that a
strong network, very strong network, very close, watched each other's backs,
right?
looked out for one another. You know, there's always a school bully.
Yeah.
And that comes from insecurities and lack of understanding of a person. So, um, for a small period of time, people said mean things to Kamala, not knowing her. They didn't know her. They weren't friends with her. I doubt if they've ever walked up to her and said, "Hi, I'm so and so." But they learned very quickly that her friends would not tolerate that, that they would defend her.
You're referring to yourself there.
To some degree. To some degree. Modesty goes a long way.
Do
Based
you?
on what you've heard. And there's one person who is on this live feed, Colette Clayton, who could attest to that. Her sisters were extremely close with Kamala as well. And two of her sisters were part of Super Six.
Got you. Yeah. So Super Six was more than a dance troupe. It was kind of like
a sisterhood.
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely
Right.
a sisterhood.
How did you wind up traveling to and from school, and how did Kamala wind up traveling to and from school to her home and back? Did you walk through neighborhoods? How did that whole thing?
Sometimes. Yeah. Initially, when we first got, I'll speak for the people that came from the neighborhood I came from, being Little Burgundy. We, most of us walked to school from our respective neighborhoods, but the weather conditions getting colder in the fall, it's impossible to walk in sub-zero temperatures like 60, 50 below zero on any given day. So we start taking public transportation. However, to get to the metro, which is equated to the subway in New York, we'd have to walk to Alexis Neon Plaza. They would mostly think that, oh my God, a bunch of Black children are walking through here. That's called police, they're stealing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. As far as I know, Kamala took public transportation. And then most times after school, myself and another good friend, Brian Israel, who is now Metro DC Police, and he drove her home. I would go with him, and every day we would drive Kamala home for a long period of time.
Right. So do you have any like specific memories or experiences that sort of demonstrated Kamala's values in action during sort of that period of time?
Kamala was a proponent of strength in numbers.
And elaborate on that.
And strength in numbers. So she had her Super Six sisterhood, and a few other friends like me who were not in Super Six, but we stuck together. We went to high school parties together, whatever city they were in, like LaSalle, NDG, Cote d'Ivoire. We went together as a group, again, reinforcing their strength in numbers.
Exactly. Understood. So speaking of values, I want to sort of pivot our conversation, draw your attention to statements made by a woman named Wanda Kagan, the self-described best friend of Kamala Harris. She appears to be enjoying this newfound fame that she has. Certainly, if you look her up on Google, she seems to be enjoying that newfound fame. But that's really not my interest here today in the conversation about Ms. Kagan. Actually, Ms. Kagan's at the center of a media investigation because of certain statements that she made about living at Kamala Harris's home while you were in high school, and that was happening over a very long and extended period of time, largely as a result of having an abusive stepfather and sort of leaving her home in order to stay in Kamala's home. I believe that during the Democratic National Convention speech, the Democratic nominee mentioned this experience about her.
That is correct.
So you are familiar with Ms. Kagan?
Very.
So let's just start with what you can tell us about that circumstance, the story that's kind of out there, and we'll go from there.
Okay. So what I know to be correct is that Kamala started Westmont High in 1978. Wanda Kagan did not get to Westmont High until 1980, which was the 10th grade in which she came to our school because her high school, Monkland High, was shut down. The former principal of Monkland High was the current principal of Westmont High. Now, In terms of the incidents and the abuse, yes, I was made aware of the abuse. However, I have searched my recollection, and I certainly don't recall Wanda living with Kamala Harris for a year and a half. I certainly do not. I
Yeah.
know
Oh,
that
so
there was a period of
where'd that
time.
time frame come from? Where'd that year and a half statement come from? Was it from the candidate Kamala Harris, or was it from Wanda Kagan?
I have never heard Kamala say that it was a year and a half. However, I have read articles where Miss Kagan has stated it was a year and a half.
So in effect, Miss Kagan embellished the story. That you don't deny that she was actually at Kamala's
No,
house for
not at
some
all.
period of time. Just that it was impossible to have been for that length of time.
Pretty much.
Is it your sense that this embellishment was what was? Do you have a sense of the motive for that?
I can't speak to anybody's motives or intentions. Um, I just can't, but I would um, hope that the focus remains on therapy for women that are abused, and that she builds a platform to aid and assist and facilitate the process of getting the necessary tools and resources.
So before I leave this topic in particular, and
Mhm.
so I think I shouldn't say leave it because it actually is part of the spark that led to some of the media investigation in Montreal. So it, while it may have only was one little fact that was embellished upon, that
Mhm.
was the spark apparently that led to these
Me
other
being here
national media
today.
outlets to begin to dig in because it appears that there's an inconsistency and perhaps they thought Vice President Harris had something to hide. And so they're up there digging and found nothing, or at least so far,
Nothing.
that's
Nothing.
my understanding. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, it is. Yes, it
So,
is. I mean, Kamala was exemplary in deportment and everything.
so how would you characterize
She's a
then? What
consummate
was?
friend.
I'm sorry for speaking over you.
It's
Go
fine.
ahead. So,
Kamala is a consummate friend. Go ahead.
so how would you characterize the relationship between, as far as you know, between Vice President Harris and Ms. Kagan?
What I know to be true is that after high school, we all pretty much went our separate ways. Kamala returned to the States to go to Howard University. I came back to New York. And so I think it was 2005 when Kamala was appointed Attorney General that Wanda reached back out to her, and that their friendship rekindled
I
as a
see.
result of that.
Understood. Understood. Uh, it also was reported that Vice President Harris's interest in domestic violence might have sort of got its genesis from that experience that was happening um, during high school. Um, can you
Mhm.
connect the dots for us on that, if you can?
Yes, I can. So, to a degree, I would have to agree with Kamala. Wanda Kagan is not her only friend that came from a toxic environment or a troubled home. I recall the Easter break of 1980, me spending the entire 10 days at Kamala's house, because in my home there was physical abuse to my mom, not to us. And Kamala, her mother Shamla, and Maya provided a safe haven for me.
Uh, you know, I'm sure, certainly I speak for myself, and I'm sure for everyone watching, appreciate you divulging that personal information about
Mhm,
yourself.
mhm.
Um,
Transparency, I mean, it's the only way it's going to work is to be transparent.
well, I mean, also in your case, isn't it sort of like, isn't that the career path that you chose?
Absolutely. It's year 29 as an advocate for domestic violence.
You want to talk a little bit about what you do? That would sort of help us understand what that means.
So, victims of domestic violence are not solely predicated on women, it happens to men, but the highest population is for women. So, the organization that I'm affiliated with and have worked for for quite some time has assisted in the safety, relocation, and protection, providing resources like medical, education, therapeutic services to domestic violence in and around the 5 boroughs and neighboring states.
And so you're primarily in the New York area and been doing that your entire adult life, just about.
Just about.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for your work. Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
As a former federal prosecutor, we work with organizations like yours on cases, and certainly at the state level as well. I think, just as an aside, I should mention, as you were talking about her transition from high school into Howard University, that's actually when I met Kamala. And I just need everyone to know that when I met her, she joined Howard's debate team, and I was the captain of the team. And we had a nationally ranked team. It was intense. And that very year was when she ran for her first public office, which was in the School of Liberal Arts. So I just wanted to put that out there, that I have a personal relationship, at least had a personal relationship with her. But you know how it is. I mean, I was a super senior, like this is my 5th year, right? So, seniors in college, like, and you got a freshman, that's almost like a senior citizen compared to the freshman. So I didn't have a whole lot of interaction with her, but we did have that experience together. And I just wanted to point that out.
For a moment, John?
Of course.
Through your research before we arrived here today, as I mentioned to you on several of our dialogues, that you've been fortunate enough yourself to hear firsthand accounts about myself, friends of Kamala's that actually had a relationship with Kamala. You've also been able to corroborate my work with domestic violence. And for me, it gives the American public an opportunity to understand Kamala is not just a person running for presidency. She is a concerned American. And I have to say this, I don't agree with everything where she stands. I have my own personal views and opinions. But the fact that she is attempting to do the greatest assistance for people in domestic violence, because unfortunately in America, we give $150 billion to the Humane Society, $30 million to domestic violence.
Yeah. That imbalance says a lot about the society that we live in.
Yes.
And surely we can have a good time in another show talking about valuing pets over personal life, or property over life, and things of that nature. The values debate continues in this country for sure.
But the stance that Kamala has taken for Americans don't know her is to let them know, I'm here in the trenches with you.
Got you.
I see you. I acknowledge you. I value, your plight.
Which is a great segue for us to talk about Michael Cornish. Not Cornish, I guess it's Cronish. Right.
Cronish.
So Michael Cronish is the political investigative reporter for the Washington Post, the same unit that investigated Watergate and a number of other big scandals. Their way and method is to do deep cover stories. They go in, they set up camp, and they dig it out and dig out the story. He's done a book on former President Donald Trump. He's done a book on John Kerry, who ran for president. He also did a book on Mitt Romney, who also ran for president. And so this Michael Cronish, out of the blue, contacts you a few days ago. Right. So let's start there, especially since we were just talking about the kind of commitment that Kamala Harris has to the community, to people, what she stood for throughout her young life and adult
Mhm.
life.
Mhm.
So you would think that the investigation was to sort of dig that out. When you met with Michael Cronish, was that what the focus was?
No.
So what was it, and how did it come about? Let's start
Okay.
there.
Michael Cronish is a soft-spoken person. He has a very warm introduction, which would lead you to believe that he is for a good story. I Michael Cronish has been provided the names, phone numbers, employment, addresses, numbers that have never been listed for people who have never had a piece of mail at their address for whatever their personal reasons, picks up the phone and calls them. Again, I reiterate, you and I have both received firsthand information corroborating my statement.
Yes, I was on the phone with a witness who specifically talked about the fear and the unease that she felt when she got a call on a number that no one has, that has information about her at her address, her phone number, access where she's working, these kinds of things. And so, yeah, I personally spoke with that witness, and we hope to be able to convince her to come on and speak on this show as well. So, yeah, I can corroborate that myself, and can say that we did have that conversation. Um, so as it relates to him, what exactly did he want from you?
He said, I was told that you are the person to speak with Kamala Harris. He said, I was also told that if I wanted the truth with regards to Wanda Kagan, because he wants to dispel the premise in which she is seeking 5 minutes of fame. I
Yeah.
said, I'm not here to prove or disprove, but I could speak to the kind of individual, the character, the integrity, the credibility of Kamala Harris, who is running for the Democratic nomination for presidency of this country.
Now, at the time that you first spoke with the reporter from the Washington Post,
Mm-hmm.
is it true that, as far as he shared with you, he was still in the United States and was intending to travel to Montreal to gather further information?
That is correct.
And what was his purpose for going to Montreal?
He wanted to investigate what Kamala's views are with regards to the culture between the Caribbeans who had an influx into Canada, Montreal in particular, what her racial views were of going to a school that was predominantly Jewish, living in a Jewish neighborhood, and how it was as her mother being a scientist and professor at McGill University and dealing with a Francophone province, which means predominantly French.
Yes. So at that time, as I recall, and I did a little research on this, around that same year, or should I say around 1980, give or take 79, 80, there was the Ontario referendum, where people our age can remember that the Ontario um, district, district's not the right word,
Province.
province, the Ontario province was trying to secede from Canada. And there was a lot of discussion about Montreal and the entire province being French only, and at a minimum, French as the first language in that jurisdiction. You mentioned that that came up in the conversation.
Yes. Miss Michael asked me, what is your fondest or most vivid memory? I said, removing the street signs from English to French. I also remember, most of the students remember that in order to graduate from high school, that you had to pass French. You could not get out of high school without French being the primary language.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. S-
So it went from an election course to a mandatory course.
Uh-huh. So, from the standpoint of the impact that it was having on you, the American students that were living in Montreal and
Mhm.
attending the high school, it was sort of a limited impact from that perspective. That is to say, you weren't there doing analysis on whether the referendum should be approved or not. You were just kind of realizing the impacts, the physical and immediate impacts of the referendum, like changing signs, having the responsibility of learning French, etc.
Yes, and the focus what we have to get out of high school.
Right, right. Um, so then let's talk about when he arrived in Montreal.
Mhm. Yes.
About how many, today is September 18th, Tuesday, as I recall.
Mhm.
What day do you remember that you heard him say he would be traveling to Montreal? And do you have any knowledge of whether he's still there?
According to my conversation with Michael, that he would be traveling Monday, September 17th, which was yesterday, to Montreal. And today, in fact, that I heard from Michael probably 4 times
Mhm.
while still being in Montreal.
And see, one of those times it sort of bothered me when you were sharing this with me earlier was using that same kind of nice tone, easygoing to try to get a really important and sensitive piece of information out of you. Could you tell us what that was?
With
Re-
regards to any habits you may.
relating to the house and the address.
Yes. Oh, he asked me if I knew the address in the house. And I said, I do, in fact. Well, he said, can you give me the address? He said, I'm in a car with a driver right now, and I have an idea where it is. Can you point me to the house? I said, it's on Grosvenor. If you go anywhere in Montreal, there's this in Westmount, more importantly, there's a sign of famous people who lived in Montreal.
Yeah.
Kamala's name is on the sign.
Did he want more information than
Yes, he sent me
just the
several
general
pictures
neighborhood?
of homes and asked me if I can identify if, in fact, that was her home.
While he's been in Montreal, as far as you know, have you been contacted by other friends in the sort of the Super Six or other friends associated with Kamala during that period of time?
Quite a few.
Have you been contacted by any of them about what's been happening in Montreal the last couple of days?
I can count 4 minimum, and for 3 in particular, one of whom you've had the opportunity to speak with, the approach in which Michael used made them leery and distrustful of him and his intentions. They said it, there's always been a climate of not trusting Americans anyway, so this exacerbated an already anxiety that existed. And just to approach them with the information, oh, I got your information because I'm a good reporter. That doesn't work.
Mm-hmm. I heard the word salacious being used. Let's talk about that. Salacious details.
Well, one person in particular was alleged, of course, I didn't see it, alleged to have been paid for information in which she provided to him in order to receive our information to get to us.
Right.
There's other questions like, did she have a drug habit? Was she an alcoholic? What kind of home life she had? Was it supportive? Those kinds of questions. And
Yeah.
again, being a person who spent many nights in Kamala's house, her mother, Shamala, Dr. Shamala Harris, was probably the most pious woman I've ever met in my life. She was very nurturing, very articulate. She was an extreme educator, meaning that she was worldly because she has traveled the world so much. She taught us about India, She taught us about so many different parts of the world that many of us have yet to see. There was a calmness in Kamala's house.
Mm,
There was a peace in there. And so to insinuate, infer, imply it was anything other than that is quite insulting for those who really did spend
yeah,
quality time at the Harris home.
sure. Um, Now, today, it sounds like we've learned that there's additional media outlets that have descended upon Montreal and the same group of friends, causing even more sort of distress amongst the group.
Mhm.
Um, what have you heard about that?
The BBC has shown up. Um, the Toronto Star has knocked on two people's doors. The BBC called a former classmate and said to them, I know that you're in law enforcement and I know that you're not able to give us pertinent information, but how much can you tell us about Kamala without getting yourself in trouble?
Hmm. Insinuating that maybe saying anything would somehow
Right,
cause trouble.
right.
So let's talk a little bit about what this has done to the group. I can only imagine that there would be now suspicion among longtime friends, distrust being, like what has this done to you
It just,
personally? What has it done to the group?
to the group, it just reinforces what they've always felt, that investigative reporters cannot be trusted. It also proves that to them and to myself that we really don't have any privacy.
Yeah.
And that's the scariest part. If you've never had your name on a landline phone, you've never had a physical address with your name on the lease and or deed, how do you get to someone's house?
Yeah.
How do you get their home number? How?
Well, I mean, it appears to me that the obvious answer is that the Washington Post reporter and or the Post itself is using contacts in law enforcement or the intelligence community to find this information. Surely been published in the past. They have used those kinds of sources, and it's unfortunate that they're using it on innocent friends as a way to sort of gin up unfounded allegations and salacious details.
But it's even more disconcerting because my friends don't live in this country. They live in an entirely different country, a entirely different governmental system, right? The laws are certainly very, very different. And one would
Mhm.
think that they are safe in their country, in their province, in their city, in their home. And that is an intrusive and invasive, to say the least.
It is. So, as I have
Can I
been
just
asked,
interject this?
yes,
Like,
please,
for
of
me,
course.
my phone number, less than 5 people have my cell phone number. It is my work number. And so uh, I don't get it. I don't understand. And I certainly cannot divulge the location of where a domestic violence shelter would be. Who does that? You can't do that.
Right, right,
You breach the
sure,
confidentiality and safety of its clients.
yeah. You know, this is a really unfortunate story. And I think the worst part about it is that all the resources that have been expended on trying to find nothing, it could have been
Mhm,
expended on really trying to get information in front of the American voters to help us understand or help those that don't know her to
mhm.
actually understand the kind of woman she is.
Here's
Um,
the again, I reiterate, because you have been privy to hearing firsthand information with not just one of my friends from Montreal, not two of my friends from Montreal, but several of my friends
yes,
have called in distress while you were interviewing me. And so you're hearing it yourself. They're distressed over this.
and
Canadians are simple people.
and
Simple.
and for the benefit of the viewers, and for transparency, you and I are working together to get them to come on the air with us and tell their
Yes,
story as well.
that is correct.
And it's our hope that in the next couple of days, within the next couple of days, we'll be able to announce the dates when we can have those next set of interviews.
That is also correct.
Excellent. So I want to sort of pivot back to the positive, right?
Okay.
You know, in it's like I don't want to end our conversation talking about this nonsense
Right.
when there could have been such much more productive use of the resources and time and the energy that you and all of your friends have shared with these reporters and even trying to avoid them at times.
Mm-hmm.
So what I know this is a burning thing for you. I'd like, let me see how to phrase this. So it's my sense
Mm-hmm.
that certain personal experiences that
Mm-hmm.
Kamala Harris had in her life
Mm-hmm.
are now reflected in policies that she supports,
I
right?
completely
That
concur.
the woman itself, that how
Mm-hmm.
she, those experiences are part of her platform. And you've talked about a few things, a few areas that you think directly link those experiences to those components of her presidential platform. Can we start with that?
Yes. As I was mentioned that, well, let me just give you some of the statistics. Post-pandemic, domestic violence has increased 63%, right? With that, women and children, the family is displaced. Many of the clients that go in and out of shelters around this country are given some form of housing voucher. The issue is the rising costs of real estate, especially in a state like New York and California, Atlanta, Chicago, very, very expensive. The laws prohibit landlords from accepting any additional monies towards the rent. They can only accept the amount that's on the voucher. However, the rents are so absorbent that they do not cover what is actually necessary to get the apartment or place to live. Now, there's such a growing concern for that when Kamala announced that she's going to do something about the housing crisis, it's a twofold
Mm-hmm.
for this industry. The other thing is that healthcare. To do away with Obamacare, some
Yeah.
people will never have any form of healthcare. They certainly won't be covered under what's in place now if they have pre-existing conditions. So these are concerns that Kamala has voiced for the middle American, the median American. And so these are some of the things we'd like to, for her to address. Increase the amount that you give to housing vouchers so people could have a place to live. It doesn't have to be the Taj Mahal, but however, decent housing. Provide them with good health care so they can take care of themselves and their children, not have to work 2 and 3 jobs in order to pay health insurance alone. And for goodness sake, you have to give more money to families that are being abused than animals. And that's just purely my opinion.
Yeah. So you see those policies that she has been enunciating and have announced recently with the
And addressed.
and addressed, and you see how her early life experiences have shaped those views because
Direct
those are
correlation.
consistent with what you see now in
Yes,
a
it's a direct correlation in
policy.
my opinion.
Mhm.
I
You see,
mean,
that is exactly why people need to know the background of a person, right? Then
mhm,
you understand what
right.
they stand for. You understand what they're going to fight for.
Mhm.
What is Kamala Harris going to fight for the American people?
Healthcare. She's committed to that. She's committed to giving Americans money for down payments to purchase a house. She's committed to 2 million homes, new homes for
Yeah.
Americans. Do you know what that means for some people who couldn't even fathom ever having home ownership?
Yeah. Yep. Totally.
Everybody doesn't have a Howard, Harvard, Columbia, uh, you name it, UCLA degree. They are not that educated. And so they are forced to work jobs that are minimum wage.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the capstone question then, based upon what you're just saying, is kind of this. How should America trust Vice President Harris to carry out those ideas? Is she a trustworthy leader? Will she stand behind the claims that she made during the campaign? Will she follow through with these promises that she's made publicly? Will she follow through for the American people?
If Kamala commits first, once she wins the election, if she commits to the housing crisis, healthcare, I think that she will really be forceful with that because she can identify with the middle class American, lived a middle class American life, although her mother was a scientist and a world renowned university.
Sure. Sure.
They rented.
Excellent. So in closing, I would like to just offer you an opportunity to convey to America and the voters of America your thoughts about the nominee, anything that hasn't come up so far, anything that you would like to leave us um, with our conversation today.
I think for the Democratic Party that a president finally commit, execute at least a third of what they promised on the campaign trail. I think that America is very, very nervous with the influx of immigrants, and they're afraid because there's so many naturalized citizens of America that have nothing and have been told that there's not the resources to provide for them. However, there are immigrants that are coming to America that are receiving housing vouchers, thousands of dollars in food stamps, check cards, $4,000 a month. I don't know an American here that can go to any social service agency and receive that.
Yeah. So
it's cause for concern.
Sure. Needs to be dealt with. I got to say, I'm just going to say these final words to the listeners tonight that I've had the opportunity to speak with you a number of times over the last several days. It's been a real pleasure to get to know you. I'm so impressed by your courage and your strength. I hope that America can see from you and through you the same strength of character, the integrity, and the courage that you showed, and that you are saying that Vice President Harris showed, and that this is actually the way to understand this person. And I think we all better for this conversation. So I just really want to say thank you to you for your heartfelt stories and the difficulties that you have endured as a result of the smear that never happened.
I really appreciate the fact that you said that and you acknowledge that. And it's just good to see that, there are still people who have integrity and credibility who are willing to tell the truth.
That's it. You're right. Thank you again for your time.
You're more than welcome. And it's been my absolute pleasure. I look forward to other stories.
Yeah, for sure. We got a few. Mr. Director, you've seen my man and Mr. Director, our good friend Mario pop his face in from time to time. Mario, thank you for keeping the technical end of everything together. You and Victor Allen, I really appreciate the work that Pac Stereo Networks, Pac Stereo TV is doing. We're proud of the fact that this is on the Roku channel, and we look forward to bringing more important news and information through this channel in the future. So thanks, everybody, and thank you for your time. Thank you in particular for your time. Jamie, take care. Good night.
You're welcome.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Good night, everyone.